you can see it's one of our enablers for this event. And Mr. Tuda, karibu sana, welcome to this site so that everyone can see you. I think you're the only one in the room that we have not seen over the week. And I know Mr. Tuda has been very busy with other engagements. And I think you're also going to talk to us about UNOC 3. I think I saw somewhere that you are a member of, is it the team that was coming up with UNOC 3 or something?
I'll make some comments on this.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you want to talk before?
Oh, please.
Oh, okay. All right. So let's welcome Mr. Tuda there.
Right, good afternoon. Thanks, Hu and Jen for the invitation, and it's nice to see you all participants. I was supposed to be here, I think, on Wednesday, but due to other engagements, I wasn't able to make it. But I said at least let me come and see the participants and also maybe participate in the final or the closing. So mine is not going to be a presentation. I would have made a presentation in the course of the week, but because everybody is tired, it's Friday, because I've been here for a whole week, I thought it was going to be doing justice to anybody by giving you another overdose of presentation. I guess you guys have done a lot about oceans and marine science and everything that is aquatic ecosystems. So my name is Arthur Tuda, the Executive Director of WIOMSA from Kenya, but I work in Zanzibar, our organization based in Zanzibar. It's been around for 30 years. We support marine sciences by giving grants to people who do science. And journalists can also do science. You know, part of the problem with being the science is for other people, and journalists just are supposed to report. But we are increasingly seeing more journalists joining research teams to be part of the research design, but also to report on research as it happens. So a lot of times we wait for the research to be concluded, and then we want to report on the results. But now we are trying to frame our research programs in a different way so that journalists are also part of the research conceptualization. So you even talk about how it was conceptualized, how it's being conducted, and then the results will make sense when you report the results. But many times you see, all right, the outcome is what we report. And it's interesting because oceans are becoming a big thing now. We're seeing a lot of interest in oceans and more work in journalism and media, for that matter, going into oceans. But I think we've not done a lot, and I think this is a good start for us for progress in terms of trying to highlight the plight of the ocean. So I just got interested today. I mean, you people are environmental journalists, if I'm not wrong. Journalists or media? Oh, what do you call yourselves? Journalists? Yeah. Journalists? Member of the fourth estate. All those things. So who can tell me what is the trending environmental news today in the world? I say I'm not making a speech, I'm close. What is trending today in terms of environmental news globally, apart from other useless news like Trump?
They had a way for COVID.
So that is which media was reporting that?
BBC.
BBC.
Yes.
So that's the latest today.
The one that has been being.
That's not the latest today. The last few hours, so that's the thing. So I take interest as a scientist to also, when I look at some of these media outlets, I like, it's called Reuters. Reuters has got very good environmental news. So every time I actually subscribe to Reuters, and anything environment, marine, when it pops up from Reuters, I know it's a good story. I also follow BBC. BBC have got a very nice environment and science program, one of the best that has lasted for how many years? 50 years. You know, I listen to that, and I'm surprised that in most of our media houses in Africa, we don't have environmental programs. For those who come from Kenya, we used to have some of these programs a long time, even on agriculture. But as kids, you're growing up and listening to this, but they've all died, okay? Al Jazeera is another good one that I've got good environmental. So I follow these platforms, and every morning as my email pops up, anything ocean news, I must know. Why? Because I work across 10 countries, and anything that is highlighted in those countries, I must quickly pick, because what happens is that you're called anytime and people your opinion about that issue, yet you've not even read about it. So I think one of the things that we need to do as media people is not just to pass information, but to be able to make it in a transformative way. I think that's important, because what I've seen basically is in the ocean space, especially the blue economy, we tend to give just information. So we're informative, but we're not transformative. So our news does not help people to trigger change. I'm not accusing anybody, but it's why I compare this site. So right now, if something happens like an oil pollution here, we journalists will run to report the pollution, but not anything that will help us transform our behavior because of that activity. And that's understandable. Why? Because environmental impacts and problems take time to show effect. So we tend to report on things that, because it takes a long time, doesn't sound very interesting. So for example, climate change. How many of us report on climate change here? And people think that climate change will be when we are gone. That's how it's reported. But it's already happening. I mean, why are these ACs on today? Who has written a story about the room temperature here today and why? So the stories that don't have to come from very far. Somebody would have already said, what are the temperatures in Zanzibar today? Why are 3 ACs on? How much energy are we consuming today? That's a story. How much energy are we consuming in Zanzibar because it's hot? And how is that contributing to climate change? That's a story. But I know we're waiting for an oil spill or a disaster to say that there's an environmental problem. This is already an environmental problem. And we are part of the problem because you're consuming too much energy, and that's causing global warming. We are emitting a lot of carbon, but we want the room to be comfortable for us. True or false? True. Right? How many of us took sodas today in plastic?
You all know?
I'm one of them. I mean, how many of us? Because they don't have any other option.
Yesterday.
So as environmentalists, the moment you're served with plastic water, you should say, get it for me in a bottle of glass. So when you talk about environmental issues, it must start with us. There's no way you'll be a good journalist on environmental issues if it doesn't start with you. So I like my sister here because she's carrying her bottle. So I've seen all non-plastic bottles here. And so what I'm trying to say is that what we need to promote is behavior change. And this behavior change begins with us as journalists. So that we don't talk about what other people say, we also talk about the things we experience. Okay? And I think that way you make a better reporter, and you're likely to have something that will transform our system. So I know you guys have been here for a whole week, so really there's nothing much to say. We know about the threats that you guys have talked about: climate change, pollution, overfishing, habitat destruction. It's not getting any better. It's getting worse. It's getting worse. The global population is now at 7 billion. By 2030, it might be 8 billion. So we are not getting any better, okay? But the responsibility of the media is in amplifying these stories, okay? And holding decision makers accountable, okay? And inspiring public action. So who among you has inspired some change in the community through their writing? Sorry, my closing doesn't sound like a closing speech. That's how I usually do it. I'm also checking if people learned anything. Who can give me an example of where their stories has inspired change in the community? Seem to. Yeah,
okay, there was a time I wrote a story about there was a construction. It was an environmental story. Construction of the road in the village where I come from, and there was this company, this Chinese company that was conducting the construction. But then after they left everything just like that. They left, there was a swampy area that had been degraded badly, and there was some equipment that were left. So after I wrote the story, the county government of Vihiga, actually the communication guy called me and he wanted to find out whether I can get contacts because it was a new county, a new administration coming in. They wanted to find out whether I had gotten contacts from the Chinese company because they wanted to follow on the issue, but the company had already left. So I thought maybe I make some change by making them realize that there was a problem somewhere.
That's good, but that's information. So I'm looking for transformation. So how did we make sure that such a thing doesn't happen again? So your news should not just report, that's a good start, but we should aim not to just report what has happened, but how do you ensure that that doesn't happen again as something that is not acceptable? So I think my encouragement to you as I close is, number one, we just have to keep the momentum going because we are at a point in time where environmental issues are becoming ever more critical, and there's no point at which we have to stop now. So we keep on the momentum. Let us follow the stories, investigate, but elevate the issues also to platforms where they can make sense. But also let us hold leaders accountable, but also hold ourselves accountable. Let's engage the public and let's collaborate and innovate. So I think all these things you people have talked about, but my desire really when you talk about media people is that we need to begin to be the change that we want to see. And I think media in these current times, the 21st century, is not the news media that we were brought up with, okay? And I would wish that as a scientific organization, we become part of the science now, as opposed to people who sit outside the scientific world and just report on things that occur. So let us also engage in the research itself. Some people presented about seaweeds today and the challenges that women go through as seaweed farmers. Instead of interviewing them, why don't you go and do some planting yourself and write a better story? You know, that's what I'm saying. Why don't you spend a whole 2 days bending and sticking those seaweeds and get the feel, instead of coming to ask, so you guys, you spend the day, so how do you feel? No, go and feel it. When you talk about overfishing, don't wait on the beach for fishermen to bring fish. Go in the boat and see how they spend a whole day there. Come if you still be alive and write your story. That is the journalism that we want for environment now. You have to be there at that point. It's not about interviewing me on Zoom and asking me for my opinion. I'll tell you what you want to hear. So take time, go to the seaweed farm, do seaweed farming, planting, packaging for a whole day. You'll write a better story. Go out and see what the fishers are catching, the small fish, so that when you report about overfishing and diminishing catches, you understand what you're saying, right? So media and environmental reporting is changing. Let us leave our desks and our computers and go and experience the environment. That way, our stories will begin to be transformative and we'll be telling the true story and the real story and not secondhand stories from people who have not experienced even what they're talking about. Because we tend to go to experts like me. I'm an expert on everything. If you ask me about seaweeds, I'll tell you. If you ask me about fisheries, I'll tell you. If you ask me about pollution, I'll tell you. So I'm an expert on nothing. So take time. My challenge to you, my parting shots, take time, engage with the environment, and finally, the person who will write the best story about what I just started with, if you remember, will get a gift from WIOMSA. So climate, energy, and how our oceans are changing. The best story will be invited to the WIOMSA Symposium in Mombasa September to come and be part of the scientific experience. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I told you we'll have a, I don't know, 4 hours. You see now, we are still calling for more interesting stories. So let's appreciate Mr. Tuda again, because like he said, don't listen to what he said. He will give you a very good analysis on how things are happening. He's an expert, he has the data, but go to the ocean and look at how the fishermen are suffering, and then come and ask him for the data. Yeah, because they tell us that we are not experts, so we depend on the expert to give us the data. But again, like you said, I am a journalist myself, and I don't write a story from the comfort of my desk. I have to go to where the story is. So thank you so very much for your time. And I know that WIOMSA is doing a lot of things in this region, and especially because journalists are not experts, you help them to bring out the stories in a better way. And I remember that he has told you to pass the information in a very transformative way. It's something that I know a lot of media houses are still struggling with because of some issues that have been discussed here in the last 4 days. But we are trying. And again, I continue thanking you, UNCTAD, the SMEP program here with Julian as well, because if it were not for you, these journalists would not have been here for the last 5 days. And therefore, they wouldn't have gotten this information to, to enable, empower, and continue doing a good job. So I will now invite Enrique here. I think he has some good information for us as well. And I hope you also going, you think you're going to say something about UNOC 3, yeah?
I'll try.
Okay, Enrique will tell us something about UNOC 3 as well.
Thank you, Tuku, journalists, Director Tuda. First, pleasure to be here and making a bridge with what was just said, that you have to feel the subject in order to talk about it or to report about it. I fully agree with that, Director. Once upon a time, I was yet another international civil servant working from the comfort of Geneva in the podiums of the UN and the rooms there. But then I had the chance to work on this program, which is the Sustainable Manufacturing Environmental Pollution Program, which is co-sponsoring this activity. And it allowed me to see how a tannery works, how we make leather, and the discharges of pollution that come from making leather. It allowed me to go to the outskirts of Dar es Salaam and see rivers full of plastic trash. Allowed me to participate in plastic picking in beaches and to talk with traders who are having the room-high sacks of plastic, recycled plastics in their shops, selling, and they explained to me how this business works in real life. It's very little data about it. Once you get to talk and be in those places, you get a little bit of the feeling of how it is. I think being 2 days in a seaweed farm will give you a lot of more knowledge of how it really is. And I also had the chance in my life to be in touch with more practical things. When I was an intern in the European Commission, they took me to a nuclear power plant in Cattenom, France, me and 20 others. And it was much more interesting to see the generator inside a nuclear power plant than just to talk about it by seeing on the movies or in books. Right? I saw how massive this type of technology is, how risky it can be, that the whole site is a secure zone. And I had no idea about those things before. Even though I was writing about renewable clean energy before. I did my PhD on biofuels and how people use the renewable fuels to tank their cars. But before, I didn't know how biofuels were made, never saw it. And I actually went to a fermentation tank and saw how the fuel drips, how the government maintained some measurement devices to make sure that every drop of the fuel was being monitored and the tax would be accounted for, but how also that business worked, how we could get renewable energy working in the context of Brazil and Mexico and other countries, Mozambique that does it too. So this type of, I was interviewing some of the journalists, evidence-based, data-based journalism, where you have access to the subject that you're reporting on. I think that's extremely important for our environment. Climate change. Yeah, climate change is a very general thing. People talk about it, it's very subjective. But once you were walking in front of Zanzibar, beachfront, and you see the museum, the old customs houses with the writing, protecting cultural heritage against damage of climate change. Then you start thinking, oh, are those buildings gonna accelerate their collapse due to the heat and transformations in the environment due to climate change? And then Zanzibar will lose some of its cultural assets that attract tourism and income. And you get to a specific angle that, okay, these things will lose money, and this is an interesting story to tell, so that we can take action to avoid losing this source of income. This year is a very important year. We always say that, but especially for oceans. We just came out of the fifth UN Oceans Forum in Geneva, organized by our team there in UNCTAD, where we discussed economic aspects of the oceans, so especially trade-related aspects of SDG 14. And among other topics, we discussed fisheries, the fisheries agreements at the WTO. We discussed biogenetic resources. We discussed plastic pollution. We discussed non-plastic substitutes. And we brought people to discuss those cases. Our dear Malika here represents one of the projects that was making an expo in Geneva to illustrate more. Because as Director Tutu just said, speaking things in theory doesn't go as deep as touching things in practice. So we had 14 exhibitors showing how you can make bioplastics out of seaweed, how you can get leftover fish that is not sold in markets, freeze it, and then donate it to charity. We have a large program on this in France. And other exhibitors showing how you can make furniture and boats out of recycled plastics, flip-floppy project, or how you can make textile fibers from waste in banana production and in pineapple production, replacing synthetic fibers. So those things were commingled, so intertwined with the policy sessions to make them more practical. So out of this event, the Fifth Oceans Forum that just happened at the beginning of March in Geneva, we're going to have very soon the World Circular Economy Forum in São Paulo. The event will have like 109 sessions, a very large event where people will be discussing many dimensions of the circular economy applied to organic waste, applied to plastics, applied to electronics, applied to systems redesign. Like the example I gave before 2 days ago when I spoke and mentioned that we can deliver people safe water to drink through a plastic bottle, or we can deliver safe water to drink through plumbing in the city in a filter. The water is the same. It's just as healthy, but it has a 99% less impact on climate change and on plastic pollution if you deliver it through a filter. So we have to think about redesigning things and writing important stories on how those things can be redesigned. And I think your role in communicating those new ways of thinking and also old ways of thinking. In the past, we only had the water through filters. We didn't have plastic bottles. This has been forgotten. We can resurrect those ideas that are very useful in the past with a new clothing of modernity. So from the World Circular Economy Forum in São Paulo in May, which will happen very soon, we have in June the UN Oceans Conference, and that will be the summit this year on all things blue economy related. In the UN Oceans Conference in Nice, in France, co-chaired with France, and Costa Rica is also involved, we'll have discussions on multilateral oceans process, especially to discuss biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, which is known as the BBNG Treaty, because once you have beyond national territorial waters, it's kind of a wild west. So you can there's a lot of fisheries activities, a lot of biodiversity depletion, and nobody is responsible for it. So this requires international agreements. That is one. And there will also be discussions on fisheries, especially unregulated fisheries, and also especially how to enable small-scale fishers to continue their operations, even with a WTO agreement on this. And very fresh issues like deep-sea mining. I was very happy to have the Western Indians Marine Science Association represented here, because deep-sea mining is diving into the unknown, right? Soon, mining from land won't be enough anymore. We are looking at the oceans, at the bottom of the oceans, to mine materials like lithium, metals, cobalt, especially to build the energy mobility systems of tomorrow. Clean energy, electricity-based mobility requires a lot of batteries. And we, in countries, are looking at the bottom of the oceans to source part of those materials. But it so happen that recent scientific evidence shows that removing lithium from the bottom of the ocean can also interfere with organisms that use this lithium to produce a small voltage that that allow them to get energy without photosynthesis. So we don't know this process very well. There's I think a paper on Nature or Science that came up. And if we are to mine those materials without understanding the consequences on the microbiodiversity at the bottom of the oceans, we could be setting off a time bomb for humanity and for biodiversity systems that could blow back on us. So these type of insights, like going deeper into the subject and in communicating them to the broader audiences, is absolutely important. From the days of Carl Sagan, right, it transformed astronomy into something easier for people to understand. And I follow some YouTube channels on communicators that get very complicated things, such as black holes or string theory, or the workings of the multilateral trade system, and transform it in easy language. That's absolutely brilliant, absolutely necessary, because we are not good at that. We are professional bureaucrats that keep talking the jargon, and you de-jargonize it for us, and you are the bridge between us, the member states, and these technical discussions and the world. So in Nice, in France, the UN Oceans Conference will also be discussing the mobilization of financial resources to act on SDG 14. Because there's a lot of investments that are needed in sustainable maritime transport, for example. We have an UNCTAD, a paper on the decarbonization of fishing fleets. There's one thing you see here on the coast of Zanzibar and in every coast in the world, is that every fishing boat has a gasoline, mostly a diesel engine behind it. Why couldn't we run those boats with renewable electricity, for example, or with batteries? So the decarbonization, or perhaps having biofuels blended into their diesel, or making them more efficient. Decarbonizing the way we do maritime transport and fishing is very important to get protein that is renewable, but also doesn't contribute to climate change. There will be also a whole set of sessions in France discussing the connection between marine science and policy making. And I think you're part of this. Marine science and policy making are often disconnected or have weak connections. And it's very important to be aware of current and emerging issues, such as the role of oceans in absorbing carbon, like the role of new materials coming from the oceans, and what can be done with those materials. For example, the food, fuel, fiber roles of seaweed. Social aspects of seaweed production that could be perhaps improved, or the fair trade aspects on it. And understanding more this next between science and marine systems with economy, the big money involved on this is very important, so that we don't take rushed decisions to exploit resources that have other functions in nature. After the UN Oceans Conference in Nice, we're going to have many important events, like the second round of the final negotiations on the International Plastics Treaty, INC 5.2. Hopefully, the member states will achieve an agreement by then. It will happen in August 4 to 14th in Geneva. I probably will be involved. And we also have UNCTAD 16, our ministerial conference in Vietnam. Of course, we also have the climate COP in Belém do Pará, also in Brazil, where a lot of those issues, especially related to climate change and the oceans, will be discussed. Always keep in mind that the health of the oceans depends on what we do on land, on the materials we choose to use, to how we produce things. It's very important that we have manufacturing, industrial systems that do not discharge pollution, be it solid or water pollution in rivers, in lakes, because this water eventually ends up in the ocean. So keeping in your minds that pollution, the oceans connect everything, just like the international trade system does. But the oceans are the basis of international trade from the very years of navigations until now. And if we don't protect it and will not be able to extract our livelihoods, our income from it, as more and more we are likely to. We just came back from very interesting visits that show how many economic activities can coexist in a coastal area. In closing, I'd like to thank our supporters and funders for this training. The UK FCDO, who funds the SMEP program. SMEP stands for Sustainable Manufacturing and Environmental Pollution. So we act on land, but we don't pollute the sea. The government of Switzerland, our co-sponsor. Africa 21, the management and organizer of this event. It's the fourth time we cooperate with Africa 21 on training with journalists, starting with, at least with me, starting with the Dakar, Senegal, and then issues related to water connected to this. Then the training in Nairobi, a training in Geneva, and then this is the fourth training. I'm aware that there's more that we did. And most important to all the journalists present. Many of my school mates in high school in Brazil became journalists, and they say exactly what you said during the interviews, that journalism is underfunded, and technical journalism, science journalism is even more underfunded. And the way that information has shifted over the last 20 years made it very challenging to be able to spend 2 weeks in a studio or in a writing room to really go deep into something and then publish an article. I happened to, when I was in Harvard, I attended the ceremony of Nieman Foundation that were awarding journalists their prizes for exceptional investigative journalists, including one of the journalists present passed away in Ukraine, a French guy in the conflict. And they were saying the same in the streets there of Harvard, that how hard it is and how much hardship they had to do, personal investments. I hope that this was a small contribution to help to capacitate you, even though you probably can capacitate us much more, especially in helping with broader audiences. The microphone is getting tired of it. And it was a real pleasure, and I hope to be able to support this group and others again through our interventions. Thank you again for